She was standing at my husband's grave, pressing her hand against his name like she had every right to touch it. And Marcus was right beside me, holding my hand, completely silent. I felt his grip tighten. Just slightly. Just enough that I noticed. My name is Rachel Donovan. I'm 31 years old, a forensic accountant based in Columbus, Ohio, and I thought I understood my life completely. I thought I knew exactly who my husband was. I thought grief was the worst thing happening in our house. I was wrong about all three. We were there to visit Marcus's father's grave. Daniel Whitmore had passed 8 months earlier. Heart failure. Sudden. Devastating. Marcus had taken it harder than he showed, which was something I'd learned about him in our 4 years of marriage. He didn't fall apart publicly. He went quiet instead. He'd stop mid-sentence and stare at nothing for a few seconds, then blink and come back. I'd gotten used to reading those silences the way other people read words. That morning he'd actually suggested the visit, which surprised me. Usually I was the one who brought it up. He'd woken up before the alarm, made coffee for both of us without being asked, and said, "I think I need to go see him today." I remember thinking it felt like a good sign, like maybe he was finally moving through something. We drove out to Maplewood Cemetery just before noon. It was one of those gray Ohio Saturdays where the sky can't commit to anything. Not rain, not sun, just this flat, heavy light that makes everything look like a photograph taken on the wrong setting. I had tulips. Yellow ones, because Daniel used to grow them in the backyard of the house Marcus grew up in. Marcus had told me that story maybe 6 or 7 times over the years, always the same details, always with the same small smile at the end. We were maybe 40 feet from the grave when I saw her. She was already there. Standing right in front of the headstone, one hand pressed flat against the engraved letters of Daniel's name. She wasn't crying, at least not visibly. She was just standing there, completely still, like she was listening for something. I stopped walking. Marcus didn't. He took exactly 2 more steps before he realized I wasn't beside him, then turned back to look at me. And that's the moment I keep returning to, even now, because his face did something I still can't fully describe. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't confusion. It was something that moved through his expression too fast to name, like a shadow passing over water. "Who is that?" I asked. "I don't know," he said. He said it immediately. No pause, no hesitation. And normally that would be reassuring. But I'm a forensic accountant. I spend my entire professional life looking at numbers that are technically correct, but functionally dishonest. I know what it looks like when an answer is prepared rather than found. The woman turned around like she heard us coming, though we hadn't made any particular noise. She was around 50. Maybe a few years younger. It was hard to tell. Dark hair with gray threading through it, pulled back simply. She was wearing a long olive coat that looked expensive in a quiet way, the kind of expensive that doesn't announce itself. She had steady eyes. That's what I noticed most. Not nervous, not caught off guard. Just steady. She looked at Marcus first, then at me, then back at Marcus. "I should go," she said. Low voice. Calm. "Wait," Marcus started, but she was already moving. Not rushing, not fleeing, just walking away with this unhurried certainty, like she'd come, done what she came to do, and had nothing to explain to anyone. I looked at my husband. He was watching her leave. I want to be really clear about something, because I think it matters. Marcus is not a nervous person. He's steady, measured, the kind of man who stays calm in traffic and in arguments and in hospitals. I have never once, in 4 years of marriage, seen him rattled, but standing there at his father's grave, watching that woman walk away, something was off in his posture. Something small. His weight shifted back onto his heels. His jaw was set in a specific way. I recognized from exactly one other moment in our marriage. The night he told me his dad had died, he turned to me and said, "She probably had the wrong grave." I looked at the headstone. Daniel Whitmore. The name was completely clear. completely readable from where she'd been standing. "You could not have been touching those letters by accident." I nodded. I put the tulips down. I didn't say anything else, but I'm a forensic accountant. I don't let numbers lie to me. And I had just watched my husband's face do something complicated when he saw a woman he claimed not to recognize. I'd watched him start to call after her before he stopped himself. And I'd watched him give me an explanation that made logical sense and felt completely untrue at the same time. Before we left, I took a photo of the grave for my mother-in-law. That was the whole reason we'd come. I was framing the shot when I noticed something I almost missed. A single white envelope tucked beneath the edge of the flower holder attached to the base of the headstone. Small. Sealed. No name on the outside. Marcus was already walking back toward the car. I left the envelope where it was. I didn't mention it, but I memorized exactly where it was sitting. If this story is already pulling at you, good. Stay with me, because what I found out over the next 3 weeks changed everything I thought I knew about my marriage, my father-in-law, and the man standing right next to me. Like this video if you want the full truth. Subscribe so you don't miss a single part. And don't go anywhere, because we're just getting started. I didn't go back to the cemetery that same week. I wanted to. The thought of that envelope sat in the back of my mind like a splinter. Not sharp enough to stop everything, but impossible to fully ignore. I'd find myself thinking about it while reviewing spreadsheets at work, or in the shower, or in those few minutes before sleep arrived. A sealed envelope with no name on the outside, tucked carefully beneath the flower holder on Daniel Whitmore's grave, left by a woman my husband claimed not to recognize, and then almost called back before catching himself. I sat with it. That's something most people don't understand about how I think. I don't react fast. I watch first. I collect. It's why I'm good at my job, and it's probably why I sometimes frustrate people who want me to just respond normally to things. Marcus was normal that entire week. Completely, smoothly normal. He made dinner twice, remembered to pick up my dry cleaning without being reminded, texted me a picture of a dog he saw outside a coffee shop on Wednesday because he knew it would make me laugh. We talked about maybe finally redoing the kitchen. We watched 2 episodes of a show we'd been slowly working through for months. If something was sitting on him, he was carrying it in a place I couldn't see. I started paying attention to his phone. I want to be honest about that, because it doesn't feel good to admit. I'm not someone who checks their partner's phone. I'd never done it before, not once in 4 years. And even now I didn't actually touch it. But I started noticing when he had it face down. When he took it to another room. When he typed something quickly, and then set it aside with this specific studied casualness. I noticed the difference between how he held his phone normally, and how he held it when he was conscious of it. That difference had a texture. I could feel it across a room. It could have been nothing. People have private things, I knew that, but the woman's steady eyes kept coming back to me. The way she'd looked at Marcus first, then me, then Marcus again, like she was doing a quick calculation, like she was deciding something. On the following Thursday, I told Marcus I had a late work call, and drove back to Maplewood Cemetery alone. The envelope was gone. I stood there for a while, looking at the space where it had been. Someone had replaced the flowers too. Different ones. White this time, fresh. They weren't from Marcus. I knew what flowers Marcus bought. He always went to the Giant Eagle on Henderson and got whatever was near the front. These were arranged too deliberately, wrapped with actual florist paper and a thin ribbon. Someone who was not my husband had been back to this grave after us. I drove home with the heat on high, even though I wasn't cold. Friday morning, I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I got into work early, before anyone else arrived, and I ran the woman's description through my head as a professional problem. I am very good at finding information that connects. It's not a glamorous skill, but it is a precise one. I didn't have a name. I didn't have a photograph. What I had was an olive coat, steady eyes, dark hair with gray threading through it, a general age range, and a connection to Daniel Whitmore's grave specific enough that she knew which one it was and had been there at least twice. I started with what I knew about Daniel. He'd been a civil engineer. Retired about 6 years before he died, Though retired was a loose term, he still consulted occasionally. He'd grown up in Dayton, moved to Columbus in his late 20s, married Marcus's mother Patricia when they were both 24. One son, no other children that anyone had ever mentioned. He was quiet, methodical, thoughtful. He'd collected old maps, which I always found unexpectedly charming. He'd made very good pie crust, and been terrible at accepting compliments about it. I thought I knew him reasonably well for a father-in-law. We'd had 4 years of Sunday dinners and holidays and occasional long conversations in the kitchen while Marcus and Patricia watched football in the other room. He'd told me things he didn't tell everyone, or at least it had felt that way. He seemed to appreciate that I asked specific questions instead of comfortable ones. But now I was sitting with a different question. What didn't I know? I called Patricia that afternoon under the pretense of checking in. We talked for about 20 minutes. Her garden, a neighbor's new dog, a recipe she'd been meaning to send me. Toward the end, lightly, I said, "Did Daniel have many old friends from before you two met? I was just thinking about him lately." There was a pause that lasted maybe 1 second too long. "He had some," she said. "He wasn't really one to keep up with people. You know how he was." "Of course," I said. I did know how he was. Or, I thought I did. But Patricia's pause had been small and specific, the kind that comes not from searching for an answer, but from choosing one. That evening, Marcus came home with takeout and a good mood, and kissed me on the cheek and asked about my day. I told him it was fine. I watched his face while he unpacked the food, completely relaxed, completely present. Either he truly didn't know the woman, or he had spent years being very good at a particular kind of calm. I was almost certain I knew which one it was, but I needed more than almost. And then his phone buzzed on the counter between us, lit up for just a second before he reached over and flipped it face down, and the half second of the screen I saw showed the beginning of a message that started with a name I didn't recognize and the words, "We need to talk about what she left." I picked up my fork. I took a bite. I did not look at him, but my hands were not entirely steady. I didn't sleep that night. Not really. I lay beside Marcus in the dark and listened to him breathe, and ran that half sentence through my head on a loop. "We need to talk about what she left." 7 words. Subject unknown. Object unknown. And Marcus had reached for that phone the way you reach for something you've been waiting for. Not casually, not reflexively, but with a specific intention that looked casual from the outside. She left. Past tense. Which meant something had already happened. Something he already knew about. I got up at 4 a.m. and made tea. I didn't drink, and sat at the kitchen table and thought about Daniel. Daniel, who had been methodical and careful and surprisingly private for a man who seemed so open. Daniel, who kept his old files in locked boxes in the basement that Marcus and Patricia had never fully sorted through after he died. Daniel, who had said something to me once, just once, about a year before he passed, that I hadn't thought about since. We'd been in the kitchen. Patricia and Marcus were in the other room. He'd been looking out the window at nothing in particular, and he'd said, almost to himself, "The hardest thing about keeping a secret isn't keeping it. It's deciding what happens to it after you're gone." I'd assumed he was talking about something small. A surprise. A will detail. Something ordinary. I was rethinking that now. I went back to the cemetery on Saturday morning, early, before Marcus was awake. I told myself I was going to sit with Daniel's grave and just think. But the real reason was that I wanted to see if she came back. She didn't. But something else was there, tucked into the same spot beneath the flower holder. Another envelope. Different from the first. This one was slightly thicker. And this time, when I looked around and confirmed I was completely alone, I picked it up. I held it for a long moment. It wasn't sealed. Inside was a single folded piece of paper and, beneath it, an old photograph. The photograph was of Daniel. Young, maybe late 20s, early 30s. He was standing outside a building I didn't recognize with his arm around a woman. Not Patricia. This woman was younger than him. Dark-haired, laughing at something outside the frame. She looked completely at ease with him. The kind of ease that doesn't happen quickly. On the back of the photograph, in handwriting I didn't recognize, were two things: a date, 31 years ago, and a name, Elena. I folded the photograph back into the envelope. I put the envelope in my coat pocket. I sat down on the cold bench near the grave path and stayed there for 20 minutes, just breathing. Elena. The woman from 2 weeks ago had dark hair going gray. She would have been the right age. She had known exactly which grave was Daniel's, and she had stood with her hand pressed against his name, like she had a right to grieve him. I thought about the way Marcus's grip had tightened when he saw her. Just slightly. Just enough. He knew who she was. That week at work, I started quietly looking into Daniel's background. The way I would approach any financial case where something didn't add up. I wasn't looking for scandal. I was looking for structure. Patterns. Timelines that either fit or didn't. What I found, across 3 days of careful searching through public records, old property filings, and professional licensing archives, was this. Daniel Whitmore had lived in Cincinnati for almost 3 years before he moved to Columbus. That detail itself wasn't surprising. He'd mentioned Cincinnati in passing a few times over the years. What was surprising was what I found attached to that Cincinnati address in the property records from 30 years ago. A co-lessee. The second name on the lease was Elena Vasquez. They had lived at the same address for 2 years and 7 months. Then Daniel's name disappeared from that address, and 6 months later he appeared in Columbus. 2 years after that, he married Patricia. I sat with that for a long time. I want to be really careful here, because I know what it sounds like. And I also know that 30-year-old information is not a conclusion. People share apartments. People have relationships that end. People move on. None of that is a crime, and none of it automatically means anything devastating. But Elena Vasquez had come to Daniel's grave. She had left a sealed envelope, and then come back and left a photograph and a note. And Marcus had received a text that began with, "We need to talk about what she left." Which meant someone else knew about Elena. Which meant this wasn't new information to at least 2 people in my life. That evening, I watched Marcus on the phone for a few minutes on the back porch. He didn't know I could see him through the kitchen window. His body language was tight in a way it never usually was. Shoulders slightly raised, one hand pressing flat against the porch railing. He was nodding at whatever the other person was saying. At one point, he turned and looked back into the house, and I stepped away from the window fast. I heard him come back inside. I heard the phone land on the entry table. I heard him stand in the hallway for just a moment, before walking into the living room and sitting down and asking if I wanted to watch something. "Sure," I said. "Whatever you want." I smiled at him. He smiled back, and I thought, he is protecting something. I just don't know yet whether he is protecting me from it, or protecting it from me. That distinction was going to matter more than anything. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that comes from pretending you don't know what you know. I'd been carrying it for 2 weeks by the time I made the decision to stop waiting and start moving. Not confronting. Not yet. I'm too careful for that. A confrontation without full information is just noise. It gives people the chance to control the narrative before you've had the chance to understand it yourself. I'd seen it happen too many times in my professional life. Someone tips their hand too early, the other side adjusts. The truth gets buried under a cleaner version of itself. I needed to understand what Elena had left before Marcus had the chance to decide what I was allowed to know about it. The unread note from the envelope had been 3 sentences. I'd read it so many times, I'd stopped needing to look at it. It said, "Daniel asked me to give this to his family when he was gone. I waited as long as I could. I'm sorry it took me this long to come." That was it. No accusation. No demand. Just an apology for the timing. Which meant Elena Vasquez believed she was doing something Daniel had wanted. Which meant somewhere in their history, 30+ years ago, whatever it had been, he had trusted her with something he wanted his family to have eventually. And that something was connected to whatever Marcus had received in that text message. Which meant Marcus, or someone close to him, had already retrieved the first envelope before I had a chance to. I went back through everything methodically. It's what I do when a case gets complicated. I strip it down to documented facts and build outward from there. But I knew. Daniel and Elena had lived together in Cincinnati for nearly 3 years. They had separated, and he had moved to Columbus. 31 years later, after his death, she had appeared at his grave with something he'd asked her to deliver. The photograph suggested they had been close. The kind of close that takes time and doesn't disappear cleanly. What I suspected, but couldn't yet prove, Marcus knew who Elena was. Someone had contacted him. Possibly Elena herself, possibly whoever had sent that text. The envelope he or they had retrieved likely contained something material. Not just a photograph, but something with actual weight. A letter. A document. Something that required the words we need to talk about what she left. I called Elena Vasquez on a Wednesday afternoon from my office with the door closed. I want to explain how I found her number because I know it sounds difficult. It wasn't. She'd filed a change of address with the County Property Records Office in Columbus 18 months ago. She had moved here. She had moved here after Daniel got sick, which meant she'd been close to this city, possibly to him, near the end of his life. I cross-referenced that address with a small business license filing, and the phone number was attached to the business. It rang 4 times. Then she answered. "Elena Vasquez," she said, just her name. Calm and clean. The same steadiness she'd had at the cemetery. I said, "My name is Rachel Donovan. I'm Marcus Whitmore's wife. I saw you at the cemetery." A pause. Not a guilty pause, just a careful one. "I know who you are," she said. "I found the second envelope," I said. "The one you left after we saw you. I have the photograph." Another pause. Longer this time. "I wasn't sure who would find it," she said. "I'm glad it was you." That surprised me. I asked her why. She said, "Because Marcus already has the other one. And he's had it for 3 weeks, and he hasn't said anything to you. Which means he's deciding for you. And Daniel specifically did not want that." I felt something settle into place in my chest. Not comfort, exactly. More like the specific feeling of a number that has finally reconciled. "What was in the first envelope?" I asked. She told me. Daniel had a daughter. She was 29 years old. Her name was Sophie, and she had grown up in Cincinnati with Elena, and she did not know who her father was until 6 months before Daniel died, when he had written her a letter and asked Elena to deliver it only after he was gone, but not too long after. He had also, Elena said, written a separate letter to his family. That letter was in the envelope Marcus had taken from the grave. I sat with that for a long moment. He wanted Sophie to know her family, Elena said. He wanted Patricia and Marcus to know about her. He had his reasons for waiting until after he was gone, and I'm not here to defend them. I'm just here because he asked me to be. Daniel had a daughter who was almost 30 and who had grown up without knowing her father's name, and her father had left her a letter and left his family a letter and had trusted Elena to make sure both were delivered. And Marcus had been sitting across from me every evening for 3 weeks, knowing about a sister he'd never met and saying nothing. I thanked Elena. I told her I'd be in touch. I hung up and sat in my quiet office for a full 7 minutes before I trusted myself to move. I thought about Daniel pressing his hand to my arm in the kitchen 3 years ago, saying, "The hardest thing about keeping a secret isn't keeping it. It's deciding what happens to it after you're gone." He had known exactly what he was saying. He had been talking to me specifically. And I hadn't understood it at the time. But I understood it now. I didn't say anything to Marcus that night. Or the next night. I needed 2 days just to sit inside what I now knew and figure out what I actually felt about it, separately from what I planned to do about it. Those are 2 different processes, and I've learned not to collapse them into one. When I collapse them, I make decisions out of emotion that my calmer self has to live with. I didn't want to do that here. What I felt. Grief for Daniel, which surprised me with how sharp it was. Not because he'd had a relationship before Patricia. That was 30 years ago. That was a life lived before the one I knew him in. But because he had spent years carrying this knowledge alone, had held a daughter at arm's length for her entire childhood, and had ultimately decided that a letter delivered posthumously was the most honest thing he could manage. That made me incredibly sad. And I think it would have made him sad too, if he'd let himself feel it. What I also felt, a specific hurt about Marcus. Not rage, not betrayal in the way that word usually lands, just a quiet wound that comes from realizing the person you share everything with made a unilateral decision about what you were allowed to know. He had read that letter. He had processed it alone. He had sat across from me for 3 weeks, carrying this thing, and chosen silence. That choice was its own statement whether he'd meant it to be or not. On the third evening, I asked Marcus to sit down with me after dinner. He could tell from my face that something was different. I watched him register it. That small recalibration, the way his hands came to rest on the table a little too deliberately. I know about Sophie, I said. He was quiet for a long time. Not performing. Actually, still, I know you've had the letter for 3 weeks, I continued. I know you've been trying to figure out what to do with it, and I understand that this is enormous and unexpected, and I'm not going to pretend that what your father kept from you isn't painful. But Marcus, you made a decision about what I got to know. You made it without asking me, and that's the part I need us to talk about. He exhaled slowly. He looked at his hands. I didn't know how to tell you, he said. I was still trying to process it myself. I know, I said. I believe that's true. It feels like... He stopped. It feels like everything I thought I knew about him shifted 3 inches to the left, and I can't get the picture to sit right again. That was the most honest thing he'd said in 3 weeks, and I recognized it as such. I know, I said again. I felt that too when I found out. And I found out without you, which means we both did this part alone when we didn't have to. He looked up at me then. I said, there's a woman named Sophie who is 29 years old and who just found out 6 months ago that she had a father who existed and who is now gone. And she probably doesn't know if she's allowed to grieve him. She probably doesn't know if she's allowed to want to know you. And I think your dad trusted Elena to start this process because he wanted it to happen. He wanted you to know her. He just didn't know how to be alive for that conversation. Marcus put his face in his hands for a moment. Not crying, just holding something. We talked for 3 hours that night. About Daniel. About Sophie. About Elena and Cincinnati and 30 years of a silence that had its own complicated shape. About the letter, which Marcus finally got up and retrieved from the inside pocket of the jacket he'd been hiding it in. Folded into a plain white envelope with Marcus's name written in his father's handwriting, which made both of us go quiet for a moment just looking at it. I didn't read the letter. That was his, but I sat beside him while he read it again, and I watched his face move through things I'd never seen on it before, and I put my hand on his arm and stayed there. 3 weeks later, Marcus reached out to Sophie. It wasn't immediate or easy or cinematic. He drafted the message 4 times. He second-guessed himself twice. He asked me to read the final version, which was short and careful and honest, and I told him it was exactly right. She responded within an hour. Her first message was 2 sentences. I've been hoping you would reach out. I didn't know if you would want to. They have met once since then, for coffee, for 2 hours, in a neutral location. Marcus came home quiet, but not in his old way. Not the locked door quiet. A different kind. More like someone who has put something down they'd been carrying in an uncomfortable position for a long time. Elena and I have spoken twice more. She is not a villain in this story. She was a woman who loved someone for a season 30 years ago, raised their daughter with honesty and steadiness, and kept a promise to a man she had never fully stopped caring about. I don't have a simple feeling about her, but I respect her. That feels like enough for now. Patricia knows. That conversation happened at the kitchen table of the house Marcus grew up in, on a Sunday, with all of us present. It was the hardest hour I've sat through in years. But Patricia Whitmore is a harder and quieter and more generous woman than most people give her credit for. She cried. Then she asked what Sophie looked like. Marcus showed her a photo. Patricia sat with it for a long moment and then said, She has his hands. That was the moment I had to look at the ceiling for a while. Daniel kept a secret for 30 years that cost him in ways none of us will ever fully understand. But he didn't let it disappear with him. He found an imperfect and delayed and posthumous way to tell the truth. And the truth, as it turns out, does not always break things. Sometimes it just restructures them, moves the picture 3 inches to the left until everyone adjusts their eyes. I'm still adjusting mine. If this story sat with you, if you felt it somewhere real, please leave a comment below. I read every single one. Like this video if it moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. There are more stories here waiting for you, and they don't get easier, but they do get more honest. I'll see you in the next one.